All right, happy Wednesday, everybody. So, hope everybody's week is going well as we cross the halfway point here. This is a continuation from what we did yesterday. So yesterday was about getting just a little bit more clarity, not depth, but just a little bit more clarity on everything that's in candidate scope for SAST to complete. Today, what I wanted to go through was a deck scoring exercise. So the reason for going this direction is that, to me, our current process, when we're declaring a weight, when we're declaring what a size is, that is an output of refinement, and we are nowhere near ready for that. So this is to get a rough estimate as to what the relative sizing is for every single one of these. I will happily share my screen again, and we'll see where this goes. Unless there are objections. So the way that this reads, so this is the same setup as that document we were going through yesterday, where there are big blocks of work that are intentionally verbs, and then underneath these we have we have the bolded elements. So things like configuration UI, analyzer specific configuration UI, etc. Those are the things that I was looking to score, because those are the discrete bodies of work that we're being asked to do. Everything underneath this is effectively high level requirements of what the job to be done is to realize that particular item. So has everybody had a chance to go through that deck document? Are there questions that we should ground out on before we get started?
I guess we don't have baselines on effort for small, medium, large.
I will echo commentary along those lines that I've heard earlier when I was asking similar questions. In an effort not to be too prescriptive and not try to make us think along the line too tightly along, is this a day, is this 18 hours, or whatever it is. Metaphorically, is this a bike? Is this a motorcycle? Or are we building a spaceship?
Do you mind if I add that to the doc?
Not at all. Any questions about complexity while we're at it?
Yeah, I guess that leads to a good point. So that's complexity is obviously a rocket ship would be quite hard to build, but in terms of effort, that's more mundane, repetitive, just lots of work is where this is going. It would be nice to have a baseline on that.
That's correct. Yeah. So effort is, we separated it from complexity because much like the CVE curation, it's not terribly complex, but it is time consuming. So that's why we make the distinction.
I'm actually not familiar with that curation. What was involved?
Okay.
There?
Oh, sure. So as vulnerabilities come in, we have to add them to our database. We have to basically normalize that data and add it to the Gymnasium DB. So the work itself, super easy to do, but time consuming.
Great. Cool.
We ready? All right, this is an exercise in audience participation, so we'll go one by one. Config UI, let's talk backend. Neil, I'm assuming you're going to want to do this separately with front end, or do you want to do this today?
I wouldn't mind touching on areas that we know specifically involve front end. I know we had representation yesterday. I had asked a couple of the team members to join, and they were able to. Today's a different story. So yeah, we're gonna have to back burner some of the front end, but yeah, if we could denote that somehow.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, so we'll go back end, config UI. Is this defined?
sorry, just looking at the spreadsheet. So config UI is like bolded, and then there's 3 lines below it. Are those sub items of config UI?
So as we were going through yesterday, kind of, sort of. So the way that I'm seeing, so what we were discussing yesterday, these kind of bullet points of what it means for a configuration UI to exist. In other words, I'm asserting that they're requirements. So all of these map to what is not bolded here. Yes, high level requirements.
Okay. So that was, I guess that was a leading question to, I wonder if we should do we should estimate the smaller things first rather than the big thing.
How do you know?
But
you want to go,
that's
you want to go by each one of these?
I don't know. Yeah, audience participation. That's what I'm bringing here.
I'm seeing a thumbs up to say for that as well. Okay, so we'll go with we'll go each line starting at line 5. Configure SAST wide environment variables. Is it defined?
Oh, I might give this a large.
Okay. High effort, medium effort. This is not a commitment signed in blood. This is best guess. This will get more refined as we go later.
I would do large, and then for complexity, I might do medium.
Okay.
So with on defined for line item 5, with it being a large, to me that suggests that there just isn't nearly enough information to go off of. Is that the case?
Yes, that would be why I said large, primarily because this is a primarily interface-driven item, and that can change quite a bit on the effort and complexity. So I guess just to justify my ratings, large effort, as there will be quite a bit of changes involved there, but the complexity essentially boils down to rendering predetermined values.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure we're all sort of using the same gauge in some fashion.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here too. I think this is one where I expect every single one of these will need a lot more definition around them on what we're actually trying to do. This is really for me to have an input back to be able to say, hey, this thing is a lot bigger than what I thought it was going to be. And in my PM brain, I thought it was going to be a lot faster to implement. And so if it's a giant, 3-month project, I'll probably scope it down or even consider punting it out. Or there will be things here that I thought was really hard, and y'all will surprise me that it's going to be super simple, and instead I'll prioritize that higher. So that's kind of how I'll be using these. But 100%, I definitely know that all of this needs a ton more definition.
All right, let's go to the next one. So if we assume that it's in scope that we're parsing a CI file or providing defaults if one does not exist or is not part of the CI file either, is this defined?
So I guess I'm actually a bit mixed on the difference between 5 and 6, 7. It seems to me like 7 is the mechanism to configure what is provided by sorry, line 7 is the mechanism to configure what is provided by line 6, but what is line 5 specifically? Are these distinct tasks?
I don't know that they are. I was going off of the feedback that I was getting earlier.
I mean, there's definitely a development workflow here, right? There's you parse the CI file to get the inputs to the form or defaults. Then there's the configuration form, and then it creates an MR. So I don't know if reordering these would make sense or help, but it would go 6, 5, 7 in terms of a dev process. Not a development process, but when you're actually using the tool.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess I'd wonder, since it almost seems like 5 is the objective rather than a task then. So I almost wonder if 4 should be 5. And we actually have 2 tasks out of this. But maybe that's just the way I'm thinking about that. Square one.
What?
Back to square one then.
Back to square one. All right, we'll go back to line 5 now. All right, parse existing CI file.
This seems pretty well defined and low effort and complexity, in the sense that like it should be a YAML file, right? And YAML parsers are, I mean, fairly well known. It's more about like just defining the default. So maybe the effort's actually more of a, what is the middle one? But I don't know. Sounds pretty straightforward to me, but I could be missing something.
Yeah, I would say the effort and complexity are pretty straightforward. The part that I wouldn't say is defined is what exactly we're showing from this data. There's like a lot of nuance with something like a CI configuration in terms of like the context by which a job executes, or whether there's like implicit variables that we don't want to display that are used internally, like SAST default analyzers or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So at least from my perspective, I'd actually probably say large, medium, medium, just because I'm not liable to say small for almost anything, but if others feel differently.
I'm not going to disagree. I think a lot of these are pretty high level, like features and stuff.
Well, just to kind of come back to the definitions in the deck scoring document, defined, small means it's just defined. It's well understood. Medium means it has some open questions, but defined enough to understand the intent. Large means undefined or too many gaps to adequately understand the task. So that's just like thinking about the definition of it, not so much the size of the task. So by making this large, do you think that it's undefined or too many gaps to adequately understand the task?
No, I think you're right. I wasn't really thinking of those definitions, but by those definitions, then are you recommending medium, small, small?
Well, just mostly I was just honing in on defined, right? Like, is it well understood the problem? Do you think it's well defined, or do you think there are still some open questions? Or is it just like, man, I don't even know where to start here? So I think probably between small and medium here, I think we do have some questions, open questions. So medium seems fine to me. But I definitely don't think it's large in the sense of like, it can't even understand it, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool.
I think this one is pretty well defined. We do a similar behavior elsewhere. I guess the only outstanding question for this would be whether or not it's updating a single attribute or multiple attributes in a given go. At which point do we have like a compositional wizard, or is it just add a single environment variable to the file?
Yeah, something else that's probably good to note here is just whether or not white space or any other like comments or things like that would be meaningful. That could add complexity, because then we can't just parse a YAML file and then re-encode it, because you could lose comments or other things that might be meaningful. Or maybe we decide with round one that's not as important. They could update the MR. But I think there's some open questions there.
Okay. About effort, complexity. I'll provide straw man argument.
Yeah, what do you think about that though? Like, will we be able to just encode a YAML like from some object, or do you think we need to preserve comments? That could make it a bit more difficult to also have a very succinct MR, right? Or am I missing some approach where we could do that easily? I mean, we could regex or something like that, but then it's somewhat error prone.
So the way I'd imagine this working is we essentially call the parse existing CI function, merge it as a Ruby object, and dump it back to YAML. Once we have the target YAML, then that's just generating a patch diff, which is what we do for the suggested remediations already.
Oh, okay. So basically you parse it in, and we take that first unmodified object basically and convert that to YAML, and then diff it with the new version of the YAML, and then we have the patch diff to apply. Something along those lines?
Yeah, I don't know how terrible that is. It may do something weird, but we can try it.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. So I think that answers my questions in terms of like, I think there are some approaches we can take. It's not completely unknown. Cool. I'm good with that.
So I guess for effort, I would probably say that the effort is pretty well defined. The complexity is medium. So I think those both make sense to me.
Okay. I'll move on. I mean, if we're going to go with what's in bold is the objective and the tasks are what we are scoping here or scoring, then we'll move on to what's down below here. All right. Analyzer specific configuration UIs. So, so this is, as we were discussing yesterday, the differentiation from what was above is that these are things that affect SAST, the SAST namespace, these are those configuration values that are SAST wide across all analyzers. This is when we drill into specific analyzer configurations themselves. And what's not listed here, and I neglected to mention yesterday, is that I am expecting, since this is a drill down from a top level concern, so in other words, SAST has been established. If you've drilled down to this point where you're configuring an existing analyzer, a CI file exists.
I don't see this being different than the previous feature. Okay. So I'd probably apply the same scoring. I'm curious what other people's opinions are, though.
Yeah, that seems logical to me. You can approach it from the same kind of viewpoint.
So something I'm noticing is we don't have a line item for the UI itself. You know, the page that front end will build. That would apply to both this and the former. Thomas, do you mind if I add that in? I don't want to override and have the thing jumping around.
Bring it on.
I feel like, cool.
Yeah.
I guess I mean I read it as like that front end column, like G was for that.
I definitely can see that. I don't think it's going to be interpreted that way in the future, though.
Okay.
That parsing the CI file versus building a UI. Yeah, right now in this context, they feel like one and the same. But yeah, I think another line item would be more explicit.
So that's one thing that I guess we definitely probably need to get consensus on. But that kind of goes back to the question of whether we're splitting as sub issues or treating like an issue as delivering a unit of value. Where I don't think that delivering parsing the existing CI configuration as a backend task provides value without the UI component. But maybe I guess that's more of a workflow question. I don't know if that's in scope or out of scope there.
I think it's fair to say that we're scoping these in terms of like a combined issue where we would see front end and back end labels, or maybe one or the other doesn't apply to both. But yeah, we're not breaking it down all the way.
Here. Okay. 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 I'm trying to start working ahead. Okay. Are we good on analyzer specific? Silence means yes. All right, before I move on to the next one, where we enter a little bit of more controversy, give everybody a choice real quick. Do you want to continue crosstalk on sizing, or do you want to have, would everybody be more comfortable putting your thoughts on each one of these in chat and we average them out? A little planning poker style.
I think the voting or like the sizes could be useful, but like some of the crosstalks really helping me better understand what we're thinking in terms of our approach.
Okay, let's hold it like where we got it right now. And I mean, I sincerely doubt this is the last time we're going to do something along these lines. So we'll figure out tooling later. But okay. All right.
I also liked your straw man approach. I wonder if it would be valuable to fill an entire section with mediums and then we can correct accordingly.
Then I'm going to do this because it's similar work. There. These are my guesses. Reason for doing this, so this is where we get into new. This is assuming that we're doing this particular feature for a report, what we're persisting. What level of severity findings we are persisting here. So this is following the same thing where we are parsing in an existing value. Right now I'm saying CI file, but it's not really a CI concern. So wording being what it is, we got to do something that's going to update it that is auditable and probably reviewable. And we need to update the logic that actually changes for persistence. So anyway, that's why I put these forward. Or would you rather this be all mediums and we correct? That's what you were saying.
No, I mean, I think that's fine. Okay. I personally don't.
Okay.
I'm just staring at things now.
Okay. All right. All right, let's get to the rendering. Parse existing CI or parse existing value.
Yeah, I think across the board, I think it looks the same for the first two items, at least the way I think about it. I mean, without us further defining, the boundaries between some of these things. The last one there, update persistence logic for finding. What is that? You might have just said that and I missed it, but.
All right, the one thing that I will call out is now we're talking about extending something that already exists. This is providing something new. This is not creating something out of the ether in greenfield. This is, we're amending something we have already created.
So parse existing CI file doesn't really currently have value because we don't provide any thresholds in CI.
Correct.
So if these are ordered, the last one would have to come first to provide some kind of values to be parsed.
This one?
That's how I was thinking about that. That doesn't mean that we can't define a contract to do them out of order, but there isn't any values to be parsed right now, which.
Yeah, we almost need to like actually implement a new configuration setting.
Okay. That order?
So I would definitely say large for this, whether this is defined. I think there's a lot to figure out how we're doing a persistent logic. Probably large across the board for this one.
Okay.
And then at that point, ideally, the other ones would match the previous, which are just parsing CI file and generating an update MR.
Something along those
assuming
lines?
that we define it in a similar way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Looks good here.
And do we envision this being on the main configuration page, or is this separate?
I do, but I can be swayed. To me, that's a UX question, really. I have opinions, but I'll be quiet.
It'll just inform the front end if it's a new page or not, because adding another field, I think the process might be different. They follow two separate processes maybe when you hit save, or maybe you just save everything at once and it creates two different MRs. I guess we'll just assume it's on the same page.
You're leading me to voice my opinion.
So does that lead to the definition then? I guess it's already large for the first item. I'm curious if we feel like we need UX assistance here, does that indicate it's not well defined? I know it's chicken before the egg kind of thing.
If we were talking about a refinement process and something that was an issue that was being deemed ready for us to come up with an implementation plan and start executing, I would agree that we would need UX strict involvement here. To me, this is way early in a process, but that's my bias to not block a conversation from us moving forward about how big this stuff is.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to block either.
Yeah.
Let's keep this more top level then. That's fine.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Custom rules. We can talk order in a minute. I'm going to fill in medium values for all three, for all of these. If you want any conversation about intent behind these from yesterday, I'm happy to entertain that conversation.
The one thing I want to add here is that this is written as if this is the UI implementation of this. I do absolutely like thinking iteratively here, like there is value of us supporting it in the config, creating a nice UI to interact with it. So like keep that in mind as we're going through this.
So
hearing that.
allowing customer to create new rules, that seems like a large with defined. I have no clue how it would even turn off default rules. Kind of makes some sense in the sense of like most of the analyzers, you know, the scanners have some form of configuration. They can disable a rule. But that one seems pretty open-ended.
And I think for the disablement, we can just do the same thing we do for like path exclusions. So we can always do a post filter. But I feel like that's pretty defined. So I would even say small for turn off rules.
Oh, I see. So it'd be less like specific and be more of a generic solution. That's cool. I like that. So they could specify basically the path to what kind of vulnerability to ignore, or a list of paths. That's cool. I like that idea. I'd say the effort and complexity are pretty low on that too. What do you think? If we were to take that approach.
I think the complexity is small. I would leave the effort at medium because there's some implementation details that we work out.
Are we envisioning these being different, like across all the analyzers? Like, are we gonna have to do different work in the different analyzers, or will it be like one solution fits all?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question that would place the effort at medium. I think that the definition of what we're turning things off seems pretty straightforward. But I guess this is actually, there's an outstanding community MR about this right now, which is the GoSec one, which is wanting to disable specific rules that they don't care about. So GoSec calls that G104 for like a rule that they don't care about. So it's a question of they specify the rule name or the type or whatever. But I think that the solution we could filter in the same place. It's just a question of the identifiers that we have to figure out to specify what to filter by. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I guess there's a lot to figure out still there as far as like what that means to do that, or at least in my head. And we have to figure it out analyzer by analyzer. That's just where my head's at. But that clears it up. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, if there's still open questions, then would you want to change one of these smalls to medium?
Potentially.
Like I guess I think it's still well defined, but maybe we can increase the complexity of medium then.
I would almost argue that the effort would be a large, because as Ross was saying, we have to go analyzer by analyzer, and that, you know, we don't really know how time consuming that could be. Because, for example, the GoSec one where we have to filter out, you know, that I think you can specify the rules or turn off the rules with that, like some config file, but the analyzer will have to actually change, you know, the way that they either parse or to me, it's just like how those analyzers turn off the rules is still kind of fuzzy and seems like a large effort.
Do you think though we could take a more generic approach where basically you create a filter pattern that would ignore based upon the common schema that we're using, you know, for injection, right? Like all the different analyzers right now are coming together and being converted into a singular format that gets pulled into GitLab. And if we use that singular format, as opposed to like each analyzer's bespoke approach to how you ignore something, does my question make sense? Like, do you think we could take a more generic approach?
I do think that we could take a more generic approach, but without solutioning too hard here. what is there a consensus on a size that we can apply here while deferring that decision, or does that decision need to be made to add a size?
Let me add one variable before we take some stuff away. Would it be simpler to consider that, would it be simpler to break this particular initiative apart so that it is an analyzer by analyzer exercise? There's no reason we have to do everything in a big bang. Do GoSec first, then we come back with spot bugs, then we come back with bandit, flaw finder, etc. Does that reduce the ambiguity or does it make it harder?
I think the only real danger with that approach is it could be easy to solve it in such a way that then when you start abstracting to multiple analyzers, then you have backwards compatibility breaks because you realize, wow, this is not sustainable to continue in this approach for all of them. I think at yeah, I mean, I think that definitely would help in terms of helping us to iterate and move forward, but I do think that we need to at least, you know, spend a minute or a second to think like at the high level for a moment and then dive in deep. I think when we're implementing would definitely help.
I was hearing us getting blocked, so I was trying to provide an alternative, but I can be quiet, see the point.
So do we want to move on from this one for the sake of time? I don't know if we want to add an undefined, or if anyone has issues with what sizes we have written down right now, then I would just say that we bump it by one size to move on.
Okay. All right. Let me start working ahead again.
So we jumped to, we skipped 22 through 24. Do we want to?
Okay. I thought we were done.
Those?
Y'all go, yeah, y'all dig in. Y'all discuss. I'm working ahead.
I would add a large complexity to 22.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. That's definitely a spaceship complexity right there. It might change once it's better well-defined, but at this point in time, it's hard to know.
And probably the effort as well. I'm having a bit of a hard time distinguishing though between, if I give a large complexity to something, I'm having difficulty applying anything less than large complexity in terms of effort.
I think you're right to say both of those are large because we can think about the two, like the multiple compartments here. It's really undefined. The effort means cross-team collaboration with our vulnerability research team, so that's a high effort. And then the complexity is probably like defining some form of a DSL or something, which is fairly complex. So I think that's also across the board in the way I break it apart.
I would separate vulnerability research integration on this item from this item. This is
interesting.
Yeah, this is about providing the ability for customers to manipulate what rules are executing rather than us manipulating the default rule packs that customers will get, which I would assert is the vulnerability research integration point.
Okay, so instead of like working closely with them, we would want to at least have some input from customers instead of vulnerability research.
Well, it's not going to be uniform. If we're allowing for custom rules by definition, that means that we should assume that every pipeline, every project configuration is different as far as what rules are available or being executed or being included in the reporting.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, maybe it's a lower effort. It's just so undefined, like how that would even work or the examples of it. So, yeah.
So what is 23 versus 22?
To me, 22 is a UI consideration, allowing customers to create new custom rules. 23 is taking the output of 21 and 22 and is applying it as part of a pipeline run.
And okay, then I guess this is, and again, this is strictly my opinion, but this does seem like we're splitting effort between a back end and a front end and a UI task here. Right? I think that I would say that 23 is an implementation detail to reach completion for 21 and 22. So that's how I was applying the weights before. I don't know if others consider those to be tasks we should keep separate.
I can cut it.
Yeah, I agree. I would cut it.
So
And for
sorry, I'm just going to jump in really quick on 22. Is there a reference architecture or like some other vendor who has already done something like this? You know, is this a matter of you know, what are the allowable fields to manipulate? You know, I'm just trying to help, you know, at least help myself understand what does this really mean by customers create new rules. You know, I assume that there are a finite number of knobs to turn, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, we do have one competitor. I don't know how to pronounce it. Datree, that basically allows rule customizations on their engines, and it allows sort of a hyper specific contextualization of rules. They even provide like rule packs based on what kinds of projects you have. So if you've got, I'm going to make this up, like a React.js project, like here are some rules that you might want to use if you have that kind of project.
Okay, yeah, and I was just thinking of it as a means to perhaps check and see if you know, something can be gleaned and narrow that scope, because you know, when I see LLL, this to me just screams like a research spike, right? To really try to understand it better.
Yeah, I think that's definitely indicative of that. For what it's worth, I was not really considering that aspect as much as the task of trickling these rules down to the individual scanners. So there's definitely a large back-end effort there around getting our scanners to cooperate, which is either creating a custom engine or modifying the existing ones. And then there would also be a large effort on the front end of how to provide a schema for the rules to be inputted. And I'm curious if Becca then, because hi Becca, if she has any opinion on that, or done any looks into Datree and competitors.
Sorry, I was typing in the thing. What is the question?
In terms of inputting custom rules for SAST engines, looks like, so Taylor mentioned Datree as one. Do we have an idea of what that would look like, or what kind of like constraints we are expecting to have?
I can share more on that soon. I have not really dug into the details. I'm kind of seeing what kind of access I can get to these portals right now. If anybody has any test accounts, please let me know. But a competitive analysis is always really interesting without test accounts, because it involves a lot of time looking at demos on YouTube and looking through documentation and things like that. So I'm just starting to dig into that now, but I can follow up when I have more on that.
So
Becca, I linked the issue there. If anybody wants to add comments or anything, I'll be updating it there.
So Becca, real quick, I know that the vulnerability research team did a competitive analysis on the SAST products in our space. So there might be something that you can get from James Johnson. He's the one that did the competitive analysis.
Thank you. Awesome. That is very helpful. I will definitely reach out to him.
So, Todd, does that address your concern about this item?
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm watching the time as well, so I'm trying to be as brief as possible, but still maintain the content. Uh, I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to break it down in my mind as far as, what does this look like? What would a schema look like? Do we, if we're dumping all this data into tables, it seems like we can take that, whatever those database tables are, and that basically informs our schema that we would use as far as a UI, although we'd want to pretty it up a little bit. But anyway, I'm working into coming up with solutions, so I'll stop. I'm just trying to break it down.
So I think 23 effort would be small as well to match the other ones, unless others have objections.
At some point, we're going to be getting pretty good at these MRs to update CI files.
Assuming this isn't all a single issue that takes care of everything.
Who doesn't love omnibus issues? Okay. Are we good in this block?
I think we're good.
Okay. Next block, integration templates. Let me introduce this again from yesterday. The distinction between this and 9 through 12 is that the intention of 9 through 12 is dealing with what we have today. So existing scanner, language check, existing analyzers and the configuration options we have for them right now, which is pretty lean. The idea for 25 through 28 is a bring your own scanner type of party for a project. If somebody has an account, if there's an integrator that would like to provide a Docker container and the ability for how do we know when to run it, and how do we know how to run it? That's what this is intended to provide. That's what this section is intended to enable. And while people are thinking through questions.
I think you can make the 28's effort too small. It seems very repetitive, similar to the others. Update documentation. So that's just going through all the analyzers and documenting these new options.
Well, it's a bring your own scanner. So it's about how do you bring something new to us? It's an integration story. So it's not about what we have. It's about how do we enable customers to bring their own.
I'll also say that we do have like a variety of integrations that have already been done by competitors and other vendors. So thinking through like, that's what we want to help people to enable.
What part of 27 has not already been done where we have the security scanner integration document?
We have it, but if this is a new way to enable it.
Yeah, I mean, the high level comment about this is that today, like our customers just do not understand how our scans work. So this whole UI convention is a way to help tell that story, to get entry places of, hey, did you even know that SonarQube already has an integration with GitLab? Here's how to enable it. And in fact, maybe even here's a button to apply the MR to your CI file, things like that.
to your point, yes, there is documentation that exists. How accessible or approachable it is a separate consideration. I have not scrutinized it, if I'd be completely honest.
Would you say that documentation is included in the other tasks? Just wondering why this one gets broken apart and it's not a part of 26, like documentation.
Because I thought about it starting in this particular task.
Oh, okay. Oh boy.
All right.
I mean, we had this conversation in Slack yesterday. Like, documentation is part of everything that we do, or should be at least. So I like it should be factored into all of these things. Though I recognize that, like, when we first do a UI, like, there will be a lot of documentation that'll have to go with that.
So speaking more generally to this, is feature the word we're using for these groupings? Feature, capability. I still don't feel like I have a good understanding of what this is beyond like insert CI template. So I guess I would need more details to make any, I would need to read more of a description of what this is to feel more comfortable applying scoring to each one of these. So, by which I guess it defaults to large.
I mean, I think what you just suggested is exactly what I'm envisioning for what this is. It really is hey, we have a few of these predefined that you can click to apply. And then there's sort of the generic, like, hey, you want to have one of these? Like, you need this line, and this line.
And for now, I would say I'm comfortable with those scores. What do others think?
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Just
Right.
to be contrary, I mean, large. It seems like we kind of know what we're doing with this. I mean, we have third-party integrations already, so I mean, I would be comfortable with lower than a large, but a large is fine, I think. But I suppose this is exposing that through the UI as well. That goes into this task.
Yeah.
Well, I would say we already have this exposed through UI. Are we specifically talking about the configuration UI that does not yet exist? Is it big UI like GitLab UI or like a specific security UI? I guess that's why I was defaulting large, because I feel like there's a lot of questions that are unclear. But I think you have it based on what we were talking about in this call. I think you're totally right, Ross, that this seems smaller.
Then how about this? There's a lot of open questions around it. We'll leave this because there's ambiguity.
I'm certainly fine with that.
Yeah. And any surprise later on that makes these magically smaller is always a welcome gift. So this is, so we'll not that we're trying to pad, but I'm hearing too many questions to want this to go smaller. So unless anybody objects, I want to go to more comfortable ground for the engineers that are here. That's the analyzers themselves. All right. Golang support.
I'm certainly not very comfortable with this one, but I like the idea.
I understand. This one in particular to me is a little bit is the most squishy, because I don't know how to do line 31 yet. Reminder where this is coming from. There's been customer bake-offs of GoSec, the open source project, against some of our competitors, like Checkmarks. and it just does not hold up. How can we make it do better?
So having better results seems pretty well defined, but what those better results are is not. So I would tend towards medium here, unless we have like specific violations that we're expected to find, but they're not finding.
Can I ask if this is covered in the SAST benchmark that vulnerability research has been doing?
It is
Is
not.
that-
The benchmark that's been done is basically an implementation of OWASP JSpring framework, where basically we're running that against a whole large number of tools. I think this is a great point that if we find a Go benchmarking project, like I would love to connect it into that as a way to really put data behind what we're trying to accomplish with this.
Sorry, I'm gonna assume that I'm not the only person that doesn't know what JSpring is. What is that tool?
It's a Java project, to state
Okay.
the obvious.
Yeah, basically it's a Java project that has a very known set of vulnerabilities in it that you can then test for true positives and false positives, which is what the vulnerability team has built in this benchmarking framework suite thing.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Do we have any customers who have said, yeah, GoSec isn't good?
We've had multiple customers bring up our GoSec scanner particularly. Basically, they've done their own in-house bake-off between in fact, not even GitLab, just the open source GoSec scanner versus something like Veracode or Fortify, and have found like a 10x difference in the number of vulnerabilities that it finds.
Oh, that, wow. Okay, so like Veracode as opposed to GoSec. Okay, and so we could potentially use some of those other tools to find maybe some good wins with regards to improving GoSec and build issues.
I think this is one where, I mean, is there a better scanner to use than GoSec? Maybe. Is there something we can do to scan more things? I know Go is a weird language from a dependency perspective. So I think there's a lot of different areas that we can go. Mainly the goal here is we use Go internally. We want to benefit from better findings, and our customers are also telling us that we're not competitive with our Go offering.
Okay, cool. I think given that and like the squishiness, meaning there's a couple different directions, I think M is a good definition for me. I think effort is probably a more of a, well, it just depends upon how much we want to slice off here, right? Like I'm assuming that as we dig in, there's a good chance that we can chunk the work either small, medium, or large, right? And can tackle it at different levels. It depends upon how much you want to improve. So really effort and complexity is probably somewhat adjustable. So maybe leave them at medium. I don't know. What do you guys think, or what do you all think?
I think medium's good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does go back to the definition of done. So if we want to improve by 2 rules or 30, that really makes things a lot different. So if the task is to improve, that seems well defined, and effort of adding additional rules is less than more. So medium works for me too.
Okay. Hearing medium, medium, medium for 31.
Kind of in the same concept of documentation as a part of tasks. Should tests be a part of tasks? Or what's the thinking with, oh, I see. In some of these, we need to create ones. We haven't even have any.
Yeah, and what we may have today for and I'm just thinking integration tests. So to me, an integration test is a separate concern from a unit test.
Okay, I hear you. So I think in some ways that blocks, and that would help define the previous task, having those, right? Like here's an integration test that shows out Vericode's doing better in these ways. Improve, and we have the test to lock it down for integration, right? Yeah. Or no?
Well, don't conflate integration from benchmark with benchmark.
Ooh, okay. So what needs to be extended or added? Just the features above this?
If we're adding things that we can detect, how do we know that we're actually detecting them?
Isn't that the benchmark? Or
to
no?
me, a benchmark is a comparison project against multiple tools.
Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. So this is just like, all right, we now support finding this thing correctly. Let's write the integration test that shows that. Make sure we don't fall backwards in that. Okay. Or regress.
Yeah, that's the way I differentiate the two of them. I am happy, but I would welcome debate there, and we can discuss that another time if we need to. But I differentiate benchmarks, which are more industry standard, from an integration test that is proving that we're kicking off and we're finding the things that we say we can find from a test project.
That makes sense.
I realized I said that at the exact same time. Daniel said, makes sense. So.
I appreciate the differentiation.
So I would say that for the next, all the create integration test projects, defined is looser than the effort and complexity of simply adding one. Our process for adding an integration test is pretty straightforward. So I would say small for all of those, effort, complexity, but maybe medium for the defined.
Okay.
Sounds good to me too. I agree with that.
All right, let's get smarter.
I was curious if you're going to go the whole way.
Tempting, but no. Okay, .NET framework. Yes, this is in flight, but still worth tracking.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's a lot better defined now in some ways. Yeah, I would maybe put it as a S for defined. I think it's really well defined in terms of our options and how we can go forward. There's a bit more effort to be done to probably make it complete. And that does bring some complexity too.
Okay.
I still haven't really seen what we're missing to support Android projects. So I don't feel comfortable quite weighing on that one yet. So we can either leave it at medium or increase it.
Do we have anyone with significant mobile experience? It'd be nice to have someone bring their expertise with that regard, or bring in, I don't know, have some customer even lead the way.
I do have actually some friends who use some security scanning tools. I can see if they'd like to chat with us. I do know that we have a few customers that have mentioned mobile, and I'm certainly happy to reach out to them as well.
That's a better response than the snarky one that I was going to go to, that I know how to use mobile, but I wouldn't say I know how to develop for it. But that's...
All right, Thomas, you're in charge of defining all of this. You ready?
You're in trouble. You're absolutely in trouble if that's what you're asking for. Yeah.
Nice.
As to what we're missing, I'm not entirely sure, but there's something we're going to need to do in order to sign off on it. Saying yes, we can. We need a reference, or we need a test project that is an Android test project and prove that it works. And if it doesn't work, that's going to define what the effort is. This is probably very much the definition of a test-driven development project. It's my opinion.
Okay, well, knowing no more than that, I would probably apply larges to these since there's a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, at least the definition, for sure. It's like undefined in my mind.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that I've been thinking about is I keep thinking about the relationship between D, E, and C here, and if defined as large, I'm not sure how we can go lower than large for effort or complexity. I don't know if others disagree with that.
I think it makes sense, and we talked about it's better to be higher than lower on our guesses. So you know, depending on what we're lacking for that integration, after we get that defined, the others might definitely go down, but it's hard to say that with much confidence until we know more.
What's the relationship, Thomas, with definition, effort, and complexity in your formula? Are you adding them, or is it a multiplier? It'd also be interesting, like a confidence interval of some sort. You know, like give yourself ranges.
There you go.
Okay.
It's on another tab if you're interested.
Okay.
I will be contrarian, but this is me giving my own opinion. But since Daniel put me in charge of defining all of this, told you made a mistake. I'm kidding with all of this for everybody watching the recording. I would argue that this is the definition of that it's something that we don't know exactly what to do. However, it is. I have a hard time imagining that it will result in anything more than a simple extension of what we have today. So to me, this is a definition of it's largely undefined, but I can't imagine a scenario where the work is going to be astronomical either.
Let me ask you this question then. What happens if, as we're defining this, we're realizing, well, we have to write our own analyzer where it is, you know, more than just extending? Do we just say, well, then that's a whole nother thing and we reassess, just like we do when we go down in time? So if we get into this and we realize, wow, this is like 4 spaceships or a Death Star, then okay, we'll reassess rather than. So I don't know that we need to weigh that as much as it's either wrapping a new scanner, or it's, you know, extending the scanners we have or analyzers we have, right? That's what you're thinking?
That's what I'm thinking, and I'm hoping Taylor does not want us to build Death Star, or would reconsider that to be lovable, because we should all come to the dark side because they have milk and cookies.
No, I completely agree, and I think this is one where I think anything on this page can be as small or as large as we want it to be. So y'all giving me a sense of like how difficult it is helps me decide how much of a Death Star we want to build.
Yeah. So, and I think once we get into a refinement, we find out, then we have our brown pants on and we figure out that this is absolutely massive. We reconsider, we reevaluate. If this turns out to be something that's absolutely insane, then that might be a time that gets bumped to a higher maturity level as a result. I would hope that we'd have that conversation. Otherwise, we're doing big design up front.
So I think that might speak to the difference, Lucas, how we could have a large definition, but, you know, maybe less than large effort and complexity, is when just thinking beyond, like, what's the threshold, right? When we better define it. Some of this stuff, even if the definition is small, is still like, well, I mean, I guess, yeah. Well, I guess I guess an example maybe for reference would be like, you know, if it was doing something with YAML, it's completely undefined. It's like, well, okay, but at the end of the day, we know we're working with YAML, so probably M's or S's for effort and complexity, because once we get to implementation, the hard part is actually defining it. In this case, it's still a car, right? It's like, it could easily be like, create a new analyzer that's wrapping a scanner that does Android or mobile projects. But beyond that, I don't know. It feels like, because we also want to make sure that we are leaving room for the fact that like custom rules and, you know, some of these other things that are even larger. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe 43 is a better example of this then, because I looked into this before for refinement. There is no open source Kotlin security scanner as far as I am aware. So I would say defined is large. Effort and complexity could be non-existent if we simply cannot do it. Like I don't see how, in a similar fashion, what if Spotbugs, or do we know if Spotbugs is even capable of scanning Android projects? Unless we know for sure it is, I don't know how we can apply a effort or complexity that's lower than large. Because moving forward, it may be possible to move forward by building an analyzer, but that doesn't mean that, like, building an analyzer is not solving the problem. It's providing a vehicle for the problem to get somewhere. So I guess that's why, like, for a lot of these, I just need a lot more details before I feel comfortable about like applying weights to these things. I don't know exactly what, if we wrote a scanner that had a single Kotlin rule, would that be a scanner? Because I'm sure we can come up with one by just looking through Kotlin docs and figuring out what an unsafe system call is.
Oh, Taylor beat me to it. Okay. Issue in Zoom chat, customer provided Android support, and it's a Gradle wrapper to what we have to, they provided their CI configuration, how they're doing it today.
Oh, they're using Spotbugs. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. So they're getting the benefit of like generic Java or, you know, Java prod JVM type security scanning, but not necessarily specific to mobile, like specifically mobile security flaws. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yep.
Okay.
Should we come back to this one?
I think if we were to pin the issue to basically this sort of a thing, would that help with defining it, you think, with this? If we were to say basically extending Spotbugs to work with Android?
Yeah, I mean, I still don't have context to say why that doesn't currently work.
I had that same question too, yeah.
So much like the rest of this year, I would just apply large across the board unless we have more context there. And I mean, if others disagree, then I'm fine with that. But I would not be comfortable putting a medium or small on anything here without understanding the problem set. Probably domain a bit better.
I'm not hearing folks disagree. Okay. Are you okay with the integration test? Okay. I'm not going to ask about any other create integration test line. All right, new scanners. So Kotlin noted that there is no I hear you. We don't know what we would use.
So Taylor just posted detect, but yeah, then Lucas just said it doesn't really have security rules. It does. Is SonarQube security analysis?
Yeah.
It says it has
both code quality and security analysis.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there is a potential though we could use it has integration with SonarQube, so I wonder if how pluggable or extensible detect is. But if it's extensible, maybe we could that plus some of the other stories down further where our security vulnerability researchers can define rules that then work with detect. But yeah, actually there's not really an open source security tool. It kind of blocks us here, unless we want to build a Death Star again. I mean, that's always on the table with me. Just throwing that out there.
Darth Searles. I'll move on from that. Okay. Research to be done. What do you do for Kotlin? I would assume we know enough about how to add detection logic to a template.
Yeah, I'm good with those sizings.
It's not smaller?
I could argue smaller, but given how big the line 43 is, it feels kind of irrelevant.
Well,
okay, yeah, I could, yeah.
I'm going to do this, and I'm going to invite the wrath of engineers.
I think compared to some of the other things that I know are on this page, yes. When you consider I have a scale of three options. I think it's good for the integration test project too, but
Okay.
Again, that's just my voice.
Given that it is net new and is something we don't have exposure to, I would argue that. Assuming that we find a tool that we can wrap for Kotlin projects, and the request for the note that nobody here has actually worked in Kotlin before. Writing a test project. Do it?
I have very small amount of Kotlin experience, but it's not mobile. It's basically web backend type stuff. But oh no, what did I do?
All right.
It's honestly like the interop story with Kotlin and Java is amazing. It's like you can paste Java code into what's that main IDE, and then it just gives you Kotlin. Like the interop story is like seamless. So it's like an updated version of Java in many ways, but a lot better in a lot of ways too.
That's very similar to the Objective-C Swift story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Are you saying that's too big?
I think once you have the definition, I think the effort is small, but because I think it's especially since like also when you think about it's the preferred way to do Android projects, it's probably pretty straightforward to generate it. It's just defining what do vulnerabilities look like in that concept in that context, and then it seems like it would be pretty straightforward, but
okay,
that's my point of view at least.
Okay. All right, let's talk Swift.
It's the same thing for Swift and Objective-C. I would say large for all. We don't have a scanner, and we don't really know how to get one. But detection logic and integration tests are about the same.
Okay.
Does that also necessitate Mac runners for CI?
No, you can write Swift and Swift's multi-platform.
Oh, that's right.
Objective-C is, but not really in a useful way.
Yeah.
So for the integration test, we probably would need Mac runners. That's a good call out.
Depends on if whatever we can wrap needs to build it.
That's a good point. We can write some Haskell and just look at the code directly.
Oh, good grief.
Sorry, that was mostly a joke.
Yeah.
Again, Death Star.
Okay, big old regex. Dear Lord, now we have two problems. So, all right. All right, Rails. Both of these are research tasks. So I'm going to put this out there.
I actually think it's pretty small if all you're saying we need to do is research, right?
So the
Pretty well
prerequisite.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry, Lucas.
Sorry. The prerequisite for updating Brakeman to the latest version is moving into core, though, right? The reason we can't update Brakeman currently is because they changed the license through acquisition. So we have to move to core prior to that. So are we keeping that outside of the estimate effort here?
No, let's assume it's a core, but also available at higher licensing tiers. But yes, it's at core. Okay. Are you saying it's that?
Do we have move to core as another thing on here?
Not in this.
Okay.
So it was in what we went through yesterday. That's part of, let's do our deprecations, and let's also move things to core to lighten the load here.
So this is that's basically just a story to update an analyzer, the wrapping the scanner underneath. Okay. Yeah, S's across the board. Sound good.
Dear Lord. Okay.
There is, I think, still an open question on that though, right? I can't remember if it's Taylor or someone else who said that the lawyers are still looking into that, right?
Yeah, it's more of just getting a legal sign off that my grand plan of skirting the synopsis license will work and that it doesn't introduce legal problems for us.
Right.
I don't expect that to be an issue.
Okay.
It's more of a CYA for me.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. A written CYA. I just realized the typo. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave that there unless somebody wants to disagree.
Is the effort and complexity for research high? I
would make it lower.
Yeah, I mean, it's undefined, right? We don't know what we're going to find. But at that level, yeah, I mean, I guess any research item on here would be like that otherwise.
I think we have some criteria for, we have a checklist for researching new analyzers. It has to conform to a specific license. It has to provide a severity level. It has to provide a line number, things like that.
That's even better defined than I thought. So, I mean, in some ways, that's almost an M, yeah. And then we could also use Brakeman as like a comparison of how well some other tool does.
Yeah, because I'm trying to not apply a weight of large because it's impossible. It's the task is trying to find something, not whether or not we find something.
Correct. And if the answer is there is nothing, that is of value to us because we get hit with this question a lot. And so if we're able to say, you're asking us a dumb question, that is very valuable.
Okay.
How often do we have to research that? I feel like it's been researched. And I mean, isn't that why the vulnerability research team was like, hey, let's create our own generic one?
if we keep researching every 6 months, there may be one by then.
Fair point.
The
But I guess
research.
that
So
Go
we
ahead.
need another task that's a cron job that creates an issue to research every 6 months until we find one. Is that what I'm hearing? You forgot a line, Thomas.
Don't. No. Hard no. So, um, I would argue that a research project becomes irrelevant if we are able to move it to core and therefore update breakman to latest and greatest. Absent that, we need an ability to move forward with this particular framework. Or I will speak boldly and suggest that maybe we need to drop deprecate support for it.
Support for scanning Ruby project or Rails projects?
Yeah, if there's no alternative that's passable or good or something that we can make but make good.
That and that we can't move to the latest version for legal.
Yeah, because right now we have something that's aging.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a bad look when you consider our main platform is Rails.
Yeah.
But you can only do what you can do. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hopeful about the license moving to core solving the problem. I will say that it was interesting that GitHub didn't have Ruby listed in their checkbox of languages they're asking if people are interested in or whatever that Taylor linked. It's just a comment though.
Okay. I'll move on. I think that horse is dead. Workflow. Auto remediation.
Do we have any guess as to what the one analyzer would be? You know, we won't hold you to it, or the top 3 or something like that.
I think we had this discussion after you left yesterday, Daniel, but the kind of the defaults to start with Go.
Okay. If I recall, I think, I forget who it was. Someone from the vulnerability research team was saying they really like this. There is a Go library for writing out Go code. I can't remember what it was, but I know that there's such a thing that exists, and I know that already there's AST parsing, I think a part of GoSec. But
GoSec works on an AST.
yeah. I think if we were to define it as GoSec and we figured out that small subset, probably a small or a medium, because we're kind of already defining right there like hardcore down in this level. But I think effort and complexity is going to be L's. What do you all think?
I'll confess that my brain's melting a bit here. I think that one sounds reasonable, but
Then let's do this. Let's finish right here with Web IDE integration. Call it. I will put 30. I will put 30 minutes on the calendar for tomorrow, and we'll time box it tomorrow. Part of this was how do we get started? How do we approach this? And that's what we were going through this first time. This first time, I think we'll have a little bit more muscle memory with it going through it again. And I will have mediums filled in for just about, I will put in a straw person's argument for what each one of these are in advance.
What do you think about replacing tomorrow's backlog or refinement meeting mean, that's kind of what we're doing with this in some ways, and I feel like we've all been making good progress on that. But unless anyone here was expecting to work through something or needed that meeting.
I will agree to that if there is no issues on the agenda for tomorrow.
Okay.
It's empty, so I think that's fair.
Okay, then we're going to use that time.
Well, I think then we'll just need to let Zach and Psychot know as well. Yep, cool.
All right, I will add this to the agenda for tomorrow's refinement. That's what session office hours will go. Okay, let's go through Web ID integration, and then we'll stop.
So provide a link from finding an MR. I think that sounds pretty well defined as to what we want done. That sounds like an S in terms of defined.
Is this a back-end task?
That's a good question.
Is MR widget the correct wording here? This is assuming that there is an MR for what is being edited in the ID, or is that a requirement for this one?
Oh, is this the? Go ahead. Sorry.
This to me is a scan. A pipeline has been executed. We have findings that are a result of a merge request, and we are providing there a way over to the Web IDE to start working on those and work through them as a part of a merge request workflow. So this is not true shifting left into a Web IDE so that you're doing inline scanning, but as a result of our current paradigm.
Well, sorry. So I guess I would say we associate security scans with branches, not merge requests. So whether or not a merge request is currently open, we would actually, I think that we would have to instead be linking to the pipeline page. And I don't know if that's the intent of this. Does this feature depend on a merge request having been opened?
Does the MR widget show up if you're like on the create a new MR page?
No.
No, not until it's open and then it's a tab. Okay.
That's a requirements question from a finding.
Okay, so however the finding has been surfaced, whether it's on master or an MR or wherever we surface findings,
yeah,
there's no way to get into the Web IDE to fix it.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thinking about this in the opposite way. So this is not displaying within the Web IDE unaffected line like a finding. This is the other direction. This is remediation.
This is a remediation of a finding from a pipeline being executed. In my mind, that was in the context of a merge request.
I don't know what the API looks like for like opening a file in the Web IDE, but I would think that this is pretty small across the board because we should already have the branch and you'll just be at the head of that branch in that file at that line. And we have all of that, should have all of that in the finding, correct? I mean, that's a question too. I've not worked super tightly with that data model.
I think that makes sense. And just to be clear, the next one, 67, is the opposite direction, right?
All right, let me, well, this is what I had in mind. 66, so this is what was in my head. Please tell me where I'm wrong or update where I'm wrong here. In the context of a pipeline being run, in this case, I was asserting it was within a merge request. Security findings have been discovered. Right now, it results in a modal where you get some certain information and that's where the journey ends, or you can dismiss it or what have you. Instead, we extend it so that there was a link from there to the Web IDE with the lines in question, the line and file and branch in question where this finding exists. That's line 66. Line 67 is once a user was in the Web IDE, we were highlighting the areas like you would, like I'll be Gartner, like a spell checker. Um, that was the part of the merge request in question that resulted in said finding. 68 was popover text, once again, IDE capabilities, where we were providing what details we had of what we had highlighted with, this was the finding, this is what it was called. Hopefully we have a recommendation, whatever data we have that is coming with it from the JSON payload. And line 69, you could argue is not in VC, but we were amending what was coming from analyzers with recommended actions based upon the findings that it had, that it was putting forward.
Okay. I think that all of these are fairly well defined, as well as have the data accessible already. Other than, I don't know if recommendations get put into exposed yet. That might be the one that, you know, needs a little bit more in that regard. But I would say that I think maybe all but 67 are pretty high effort in the sense that we have to collaborate pretty tightly across a stage and a team with the Web IDE folks. You know, what do they need to show it up, or do we need to dig into that source code and, you know, provide and learn how it works, or how does that work? So that integration point, I think, says that the effort actually would be somewhat high. But in terms of complexity, all the data seems like it's pretty much there. So I don't think it's super complex, from the sense of, if all we're doing is providing APIs and the data for them to, so, you know, give support in IDE. If we're doing the IDE work ourselves, like whether that's front end or back end or whatnot, then pretty high complexity in the sense that it's, I mean, at least from my perspective, it's hard because it's not close to hand. Like I've not worked in that side of the code, that area of the code base. Maybe it's different for someone else here though. So it kind of depends on how much of the actual Web IDE work we're doing, as opposed to just exposing the data for them to do the work. Or maybe they already have a way to highlight syntax from quality tools, or some of these things are already defined. I don't know. Does anybody here know that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point here. This is probably, of all the things listed on the page, the one that bleeds the most into other areas. I definitely think this is one where we can probably get other teams to do the work for this. So I think approaching it from the, do our scanners and do our reports have the right data to be able to implement this somewhere else?
I do have something that goes into that question, and the answer to that right now is not always, because you know, sometimes our findings get out of sync, out of date, right? So they're pointing at the wrong place. I don't know that we necessarily need to bring solving that into this particular problem, but it's, you know, something to be aware of. So I mean, you know, assuming we solve that problem elsewhere, then we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, we should be able to link to the file location and all that good stuff.
If the file location moves, and we're talking about from, so you're talking about tracking findings as their location moves over time.
Yes.
Okay. I will live dangerously and assert that if we're talking about a merge request workflow, then that is not a concern here. If we're talking about providing a remediation from a finding from a security dashboard, I would argue that's where that problem really comes into, becomes an issue. And the reason I'm saying that is because you're working in the context of something that's under review now, as opposed to something that's existed from long ago.
Absolutely. And I guess just kind of what maybe threw me off for some of that is like you were talking about the modal pop-up, which does come from the dashboard at times.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, yeah, there are contexts where it's not a problem, it's not going to be out of date, and there are problems where it could be out of date. So, I mean, that's certainly something to consider as far as. But I mean, if we just want to check the web IDE integration checkbox, doing it from the MR is a great way to do that.
Are these back-end tasks?
I'd argue that there is back-end work here that needs to expose this to the web IDE. Maybe it's already exposed. I don't know. The link is probably the biggest question, that maybe that's already available in the MR widget, and they just need to put all the pieces together to create a link. But I would think that there'd need to be some API or some exposing to the template.
Okay. Open questions. It's not fully defined because we don't know exactly what work we're trying to do. Therefore, mediums. It is a medium effort because it's presumed that we're providing new APIs. Complexity appears to be low.
Great point.
What you think? And I crossed this out. I am happy to delete it if it's. I'm deleting it. Stop there.